Hey everybody, welcome back to the Financial Freedom Show. My name is Rob Berger. Today we're going to talk about interest rates, specifically how we can actually improve the rates that we earn on our cash. This is not money we're going to put at risk. This is money we want guaranteed to be there when we need it. How can we improve the interest rate? And I've got something I want to share with you today that actually can get you over 3.5% guaranteed. I know it sounds like a late night infomercial, but this is true. Now, traditional banks, as you know, are basically paying about 0% on savings accounts. You can certainly do better if you go to an online bank. I know Axos Bank, for example, is one of the highest paying banks today. They have a rate of 0.61%. And I guess that's fine as far as it goes. But there's actually a way to increase your rate up to 3.54%. And what I'm talking about are I bonds. These are inflation-adjusted bonds issued by the federal government. And their current rate is 3.54%. So what I want to do today is just give you some basics about I bonds, kind of how they work, where they come from. Then we're going to talk about how they calculate the interest rate. It's 3.54%. Where does that number come from? Then we're going to talk about redemption. If you invest in an I bond, how and when can you get your money out? And then finally, we'll talk about how to buy them. So let's get started. So I bonds were actually introduced by our government back in 1998. So they're not really that old, I guess a little over 20 years. And they're sold to individuals, individual investors, you and me. You can't go out and buy a sort of a Vanguard I bond ETF. It doesn't exist. I bonds are not sold that way. You can certainly get a TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Security ETF or mutual fund, but you can't do that with I bonds. We're kind of on our own. We've got to buy them directly. And there's a limit. We can invest $10,000 a year in I bonds. So there is a limit. Important to keep that in mind. We'll talk about how to buy them at the end of the video, but keep in mind too that these are 30-year bonds, but as you'll hear in just a minute, you don't have to hold them for 30 years. You can sell them much, much sooner than that. We'll talk about that. So let's first though get into how the I bonds work and specifically the interest rate. How do we get this 3.54%? And with I bonds, there are two components to the interest rate. There's a fixed rate, and then there's an inflation rate, or a rate that adjusts with inflation. Now, let's first talk about the fixed rate, and let me show you on the screen. I am at treasurydirect.gov, and I'll leave links to all this below the video. And there's a lot of great information on I bonds as well as other types of bonds at Treasury Direct. And if we scroll down, we can actually look at the fixed rate table, and it's right here. And you can see big fat zero. The current fixed rate of an I bond, if you buy it today, is 0.00%, which doesn't sound very enticing. I'll be the first to admit that. And here's the other thing. If you buy the bond now, you're stuck with that fixed rate of 0% for the life of the bond. So if you hold it for 30 years, you're going to get a fixed rate of 0%. Now you can see it's been pretty low for quite a long time. It was up to 0.5% back in 2018 and 19, but it was 0% in 16 and 17. We've got to go all the way back, really before the financial crisis to see rates above 1%. And if we go all the way back to when it was first issued, the fixed rate portion was 3.4%. Certainly by today's standards, that would be extraordinary. Now, the good news, though, is we're not limited to just the fixed rate. As I mentioned, there is an inflation rate that gets added to the fixed rate. And the inflation rate's based on the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, the CPI-U. And they take that number every 6 months, and they use it to calculate the inflation rate. And that's really where we get our 3.54%. Let me show you. Here we go. Looking at the same resource, you can see here is now the table of the inflation rate. Now, this is semi-annual, so this is every 6 months. So you get the 3.54% by doubling that number. Now, that's important. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But if you look back at sort of past numbers, you can see just in November of 2020, it was 0.84%. And sometimes it's even negative, right? Which raises the question, well, can we lose money? How exactly does this work? And here's the deal. The inflation rate gets adjusted every 6 months, as I mentioned, based on the CPI you, and that's the rate that will apply to the bond if you own one for a 6-month period. And yes, that number can go down, but here's the good news. Unlike TIPS, which can have negative yields, they have negative yields now, that's not true with I bonds. You'll never have a rate that's a negative number. And yet, at the same time, if there's inflation like we've seen more recently, you get the benefit of it. So you get the upside without the downside potential. In this way, an I bond is very unique. It can protect us against unexpected inflation. It can also protect us on the downside because our interest rate will never go below zero. And so in that sense, really, heads we win, tails we also win. So it's really a really good way to protect the value of your money. Now, a couple other things to keep in mind. I bond interest is exempt from state and local income tax. So not only are you getting 3.54% at the moment, but you don't have to pay state and local income tax on it when you redeem the bond. And to add to that, you can sort of defer recognizing the interest income that you will have to declare on your federal return until the bond either matures or you redeem it. Now, all of that raises a question. Okay, Rob, 3.54% is great, but doesn't that mean that in 6 months I could end up with a lower rate? Absolutely, you could. We don't know what inflation is going to do. We don't know what the next CPIU number is going to be. And so as you've seen, let me show you back on the screen, certainly the rates go up and they go down, and that's absolutely true. But here's the thing. If inflation's up, you're going to want to protect your money. No worries. The inflation rate of the I bond can do just that. If inflation goes down, yes, your interest rate will go down, but again, it's keeping pace with inflation, and it's never going to go below zero. Now, a couple other things that are really important to keep in mind, and that gets to redemption. When can you get your money back? A couple of things to keep in mind. You can't redeem it at all for the first 12 months. So if you invest in an I bond, that money is stuck there for a year. There's no exceptions. This is not like an IRA where there's some exceptions to early withdrawal. Your money's locked up for 12 months. That's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing is, if you redeem in the first 5 years, so after 12 months but before 5 years is up, you'll lose 3 months worth of interest. So there's a little bit of a penalty if you redeem the money before the 5-year period. Now, if we think about the math on that, if you were to buy one today, and let's just assume the CPIU number in 6 months stays the same, so that you end up earning a full 3.54% for the year, and you decide to take your money out right after 1 year, even factoring in the loss of 3 months of interest, you're going to have a return of about 2.65%. So on money that's as guaranteed as money can be, it's still really a remarkable rate. Now, I've owned a single I bond that I bought years ago. I'm trying to remember. I want to say it was 2013, but I'm actually going to invest another $10,000 this year, and I'm going to do the same thing for my wife, because for a guaranteed cash rate, you just can't beat the current inflation rate that applies to an I bond. And again, yes, it's going to adjust every 6 months, but it's going to do that in a way that keeps up with inflation. So if inflation goes down, I guess that's maybe good news to some extent. Even though my rate may go down, I'm still keeping pace with inflation, and I've got the downside risk because it can't go below zero. So there you go in a nutshell. There's the I bond. Right now, it's one of the best investments for cash that you'll find for guaranteed money. Again, you got that $10,000 limit. You have to buy it direct through Treasury Direct. The website I found to be very easy to use. It's not hard to set up an account. You could be done inside of 15 minutes. And there you go. I hope you find that helpful. If you have any questions, just leave comments below the video. Happy to help you out any way I can. Hey, until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.